Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Veronica Sansev, co-founder of CommerceNext, a community and event series for marketers at retail and direct-to-consumer brands. On behalf of my co-founders, Scott Silverman and Alan Dick, I'd like to welcome you to the 11th webinar in the CommerceNext webinar series. The topic for today is how to keep new customers and re-engage the old post-COVID. Thank you all for tuning in and for taking the time to join live or listen to the replay. During this webinar, we'll be taking your questions, so feel free to load them up during the presentations. I want to start with a few important thank yous. First, I want to thank today's speakers, Liz Owens, VP of Marketing at PaperSource, Lev Peker, CEO at US Auto Parts, Yoni Barzilay, Director of Strategic Services at Optimove. Thank you for taking the time to share your insights with our community, especially given everything going on these days. I also want to thank Optimove for sponsoring today's webinar. Optimove has also contributed to CommerceNext fundraiser for the NAACP Legal Defense Fund to help reach our $2,000 fundraising goal and take a stand against racism. Thank you. Today, we'll be sharing new consumer data. Through our partnership with BizRate Insights, we fielded a consumer survey to give you perspective on e-commerce adoption and churn. And while we're on the topic of surveys, we're fielding our May COVID-19 merchant survey. Many of you probably received it from us via email. We would be grateful if you could take 4 minutes to complete the survey. It provides valuable information to this community as we try to understand this rapidly changing landscape. The theme for today's webinar is retention marketing. We're going to explore how to retain new customers acquired during the pandemic who may have different needs and shopping habits. We're also going to talk about how to re-engage churn customers who may be willing to return post-COVID. So let me start with just a little bit of housekeeping. We basically walked through the agenda. Next week's webinar is how to personalize campaigns that resonate with today's consumers. We have Ken Kassar from Kassarco, Brendan Wicker from Forrester, Bill Schneider from SearID, and our very own Alan Dick on that webinar. We also have the CommerceNext Virtual Summit in July. That's going to be July 28th and 29th. The theme is Path to Recovery. We have some amazing speakers lined up. Some of the newly added speakers include Gail Tifford, Chief Brand Officer at WW, Nate Checkett, CEO of Roan, Darren Hall, Chief Customer Officer of Vera Bradley, and Emily Boschwitz, VP of Marketing at Hims Hers. And you can register or actually pre-register for the summit through the CommerceNext website. And then just a little bit of housekeeping. Don't worry if you miss anything today. We are recording this webinar. We'll make it available by tomorrow, so you'll be able to watch it on replay. And I'm just going to quickly show you where a few things are on the screen. So first of all, if you have any questions, there's a right-hand panel on your screen that says Q&A. If you click on that link, you can actually enter your question in the bottom. And then we are monitoring questions. We'll be publishing the questions. And the community has an opportunity to upvote the questions. So if you see anything that's interesting that you really want answered, make sure to upvote it, and that will help us prioritize that question. We also have the handouts for today's webinar. You can find them on the right-hand panel under handouts. There's this deck that I'm presenting right now, as well as a white paper from Optimove that you can download. And then finally, if you're watching this on replay, the link to download the handouts are at the bottom of the player. So you can have access to them even after this webinar is over. I'm going to start by presenting some really interesting data from some research we fielded with BizRate Insights. We went into the field and we asked consumers, whether they bought from an online retailer for the first time during the COVID-19 crisis. And what we learned was that 68% of shoppers purchased from a new e-commerce site during the pandemic. But what was even more interesting was 37% had shopped several new sites. So we're seeing a lot of new e-commerce adoption. And one of the areas that's really driving that adoption is the Gen X consumers, the 40 to 54-year-olds. More than any other demographic, they shopped new e-commerce sites during this pandemic, driving some of the growth that you all are seeing in your business. We also asked consumers how their experience was, especially given that they're shopping new e-commerce sites these days. And on the whole, people had a good experience. 70% of consumers had a good experience, 29% had mixed results, and 1% had a poor experience. But then when we asked them whether they would continue to shop through those e-commerce sites once things go back to normal, 61% said they would continue shopping through the e-commerce sites, 38% were unsure, and 1% said they wouldn't. So you essentially have 39% of customers that are at risk for churn. Now, we also fielded a survey in April, and we asked consumers, what they expected, how they expected spending to resume after the pandemic was over and things went back to normal. And overall, consumers said that they planned to resume spending levels across all categories. So the takeaway for that is, if you've seen some existing customers churn because perhaps financial circumstances or just changing needs in a work from home environment, there is an opportunity to win them back once things go back to normal. This is a temporary situation, and consumers expect to go back to prior behaviors. So now I'm going to turn it over to Yoni, and he's going to share some research about new and existing e-commerce consumer behaviors during COVID.
Right, thanks, Veronica. So here at Optimove, we conducted a study that focused on the behavioral patterns of consumers during Corona times, and we did a specific comparison between new and existing customers. Now, the research that I'm going to show you today, we analyzed millions of transactions across a variety of different retail verticals, all data that we have as part of Optimove clients. Now, one of the predominant trends that we saw was the migration to online shopping, which you can see here on the chart. And we looked at three particular groups of customers. Now, we split existing customers into two main groups. We have retail customers, which those are the customers that 75% or more of their purchases were made in physical locations, while e-com customers are the same, just with a dominant past e-com activity. And the third group are the net new customers who made their first purchase in each one of the periods that you see here on the chart. Now, the baseline for our comparison was February 2020, before the pandemic kicked in. And you can see here for each one of the groups in each month, we measured the average number of online transactions per day and compared that to February. Now, the dramatic increase in online purchasing is pretty clear here for both net new customers and also the retail customers. And for the net new customers, by May, they purchased, you can see here, 389% more than in February, so 4 times more per day. And that goes for the net new. But for the predominant retail customers, on the other hand, we can see that they remain loyal to the brands that they used to purchase in the physical locations, but now they just discovered their online presence. Now, this insight is pretty much aligned with the first slide that Veronica presented regarding the consumers discovering new e-com websites. And let's move on to the next slide. So in the research that we conducted that I'm showing you today, our focus was on identifying the differences in consumer behavior between these newly acquired customers during the pandemic and the existing ones who purchased during the crisis. Now, there are many interesting insights across different verticals, but today we're going to focus on 3 key differentiators that you can see here on the screen. The first is order values, second is discount affinity and brand loyalty, and the third are product preferences. So let's start with the order values. And what we did is for each one of the group of customers, new and existing, we followed the progression of the average order value in comparison to the AOVs in the same period in 2020. Now, we split March into 2 as the pandemic dramatically impacted our lives in the second half of the month when the stay-at-home orders kicked in. So, for example, if you look at the first orange point on the left, that minus 13%, that means that the AOVs of new customers that were acquired in the first half of March 2020 were 13% lower than the AOVs of new customers who were acquired in the same period last year. Now, for existing customers, the blue trend here, you can see that the lower AOV is consistent in March and April compared to 2019, but it's very apparent for the net new customers, that orange trend, that the average order value has dropped more steeply since the shelter in place and work from home orders were put in place, those minus 25 and minus 23%. So, but in May, there was a return close to last year AOV's rates, probably thanks to a strong Memorial Day weekend, which we're going to touch upon in a few slides. So this is the first differentiator. So brands acquired lower value customers during the shutdown, which brings me to the second differentiator, which is discount affinity and brand loyalty. Next slide, please. Thanks. So for each one of the new and existing groups, we looked at the percent of orders that contained a discount during the month of April and compared 2019 to 2020. So for example, the orange column on the left, you could see 62% of orders made by net new customers contained a discount this year, up 44% from last year. While existing customers, we see an increase of 26% in discounted orders. So that's the two columns there on the right. 42% in 2019 and 53% of discounted orders of the orders in 2020 were discounted. So what we can see is that the pandemic has created this new type of so-called holiday season in terms of discounting, which is very similar to Cyber Weekend and Black Friday, which will definitely affect customers' loyalty, survivability, and lifetime value. So now we're going to speak of the third differentiator, which is the product preferences. And we're going to show two examples that will nicely display the differences between new and existing customers. So in the chart here, we see an example from the underwear and loungewear vertical. And the graph here displays the percentage of items purchased in each category out of the total number of items. So for example, again, if we look at the first bar, the orange bar on the left in March 1 to 15, March 1st to 1 to 15, we can see that 25% of new customers purchased, 25% of the items that were purchased in this period were bottoms, right? So sweatpants and joggers. Now, if we look at the middle, that dotted line, we can see the left-hand side of it, we can see the distribution of new customers who acquired during each one of those periods and the products that they purchased. And it's clear for both new and existing clients that underwear, in this case, was the dominant category pre-corona. But when work from home kicked in, it's clear that the acquisition patterns shifted towards bottoms, which makes sense since everyone loves to work in their sweatpants, as I'm sure a lot of you have done. Now, but if we look at the existing customers as a comparison, they continue to purchase the products that they are most familiar with and passionate about, in this case, underwear, as you can see here on the right-hand side in the blue bars. Next slide, please. Thanks. So one more example before we conclude in this part of the research is comparing new and existing just in a different vertical. In this case, we're looking at skincare and cosmetics. So while it's very clear that lip products were the most popular products pre-COVID, during the majority of the shutdown, new customers shifted to hair products, while existing customers continued to purchase lip products. Now, it may make sense due to new customers probably seeking alternative solutions, while, let's say, in this case, hair salons were closed, so going online and seeking different alternatives. But in May, we can see that the trends shifted back to their previous state. Now, this may be influenced by, let's say, Mother's Day purchases, but the bottom line here is that product preferences are a key aspect to examine with your newly acquired customers. And this goes regardless in what industry you're in, and especially if your brand started selling new lines of products such as sanitizer and face masks, which a lot of brands have done. Now, it's going to be a really interesting exercise to continue and engage these customers. And one idea one more note here. One idea is to look at the customer's basket variety, the number of categories that they purchase from. So there's typically a really strong correlation between basket variety and repeat purchases. And the customers that have a low variety are more prone to become one-timers, while the opposite is true for high variety customers. Now, those with a low variety can be targeted, for example, with a more aggressive offer to diversify their cart. Now, again, this slide concludes the three key differentiators, and we'll move on to a few last slides. So before we proceed, I'd like to introduce a concept that in Optimove we call the customer revenue mix. Now it's pretty clear that retailers must focus on growing their customer base through new user acquisition, but while also keeping their existing customers happy and engaged. But the reality of most businesses is that investment in acquiring new customers comes at the expense of nurturing relationships with existing ones and vice versa. But the concept here is pretty simple. In a given period, we look at the total revenue generated. In this example here, we're looking at May 2020. For the sake of it, the revenue is $1 million. And then we divide that figure between revenue generated by customers who are acquired during that period and the revenue generated by existing customers. And this way, we can calculate the ratio of new and existing customers. In this case, it's 40-60. So there's a lot that we can learn on the health and growth of a business looking at this ratio, and companies in different phases will have a different sweet spot for the optimal balance. And here on the bottom left, there's a link to a blog post that we wrote about this for more info. But for now, I'm just going to use this concept in the next couple of slides, which are the last ones. Now, in the analysis here, we looked at, again, two retail verticals. The first, once again, is skincare and cosmetics. And this represents an industry that traditionally benefited from in-store sales. And the second industry is the fashion and apparel industry, which over the last few years, it gained traction in terms of online penetration and has a more established online presence. So in each period, we compared the customer revenue mix year over year to identify interesting patterns. Now, the increases and decreases here don't necessarily mean that the volume of orders has changed. Again, we're focusing here on the balance of the customers. And the first thing that pops up is the flip in skincare and cosmetics since the shutdown began, that 9% in the orange bar in the middle, with customers adapting to the new environment, seeking solutions online, as we mentioned. But if we look at April, we see that fashion joined shortly after, probably due to the discount environment that emerged. Now, it's safe to say that from April and onwards, brands have entered a new phase of this balance between new and existing customers. Now, when speaking of our Optimove clients, in March and early April, we encourage our clients to focus their efforts mostly on their existing and loyal customer base, their active customer base who have purchased multiple times in the past, in an effort to reduce churn rates. But looking at this data, we can't ignore that the next couple of months and how the data unfolded, the remainder of April and May. And now we advise that an extra effort should be put on understanding customers' first purchase behavior to reduce one and dones and increase long-lasting relationships with these new customers. So this is our last slide, and we're going to focus here on Memorial Day weekend. It was the first big shopping event during Corona times. And overall, the event this year was more successful than anticipated. So a lot of brands beat their 2019 goals despite the pandemic. Now, carrying on with the same concept of new versus existing, that ratio, on the chart here, you can see that in Memorial Day 2019, 37% of the revenue was generated by new customers who were acquired during this weekend, while that figure increased to 42% in 2020. Now, this marks a 12% increase in the ratio of new customers year over year, and this insight further strengthens the trend from the previous slide. Now, it's going to be extremely interesting to see how the next couple of months unravel, especially as these new customers get closer to the end of their first purchase cycle. Now, we assume there'll be high rates of one-timers, but as we typically experience during holiday seasons, but we will be helping brands mitigate that. And that's it for me. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Yoni. So now we're going to go to polls, and we're going to ask the audience a few questions. So be ready. Just so you, as a refresher, once we put the polls on the screen, if you want to see the answers, you just go to the poll section, and then you see the closed polls will have the answers. So I'm going to start with the first question. Great. The first question is, what are you seeing in terms of new customer growth since COVID-19? And we're looking at, substantial increase, slight increase, no increase, decrease in new customers. Wonderful. We're seeing answers coming in, and a lot of people are seeing new customers, some with a substantial increase, some with a slight increase. We have a few that have seen no increase or decreases, but on the whole, it seems like we're increasing. So I'm going to close this poll. And the next question. Are the new customers acquired during COVID similar to the existing customers? And so here we're looking at understanding whether you're seeing the similarities or differences that Yoni pointed out in his analysis. So are you seeing the customers are the same? Are they different? Have you analyzed or have you not analyzed kind of that cohort to understand those customers? Great. We're seeing mixed results here. So some people see that they're the same. Some people see that they're different. A lot of folks haven't analyzed the cohort yet. So homework assignment for you guys is to kind of look at that new cohort and see if those behaviors are different. Next question is, how was your overall churn rate impacted during the pandemic? Significant increase, slight increase, no change, decrease in churn. It's interesting to see the answers come in. And you can see the open polls kind of once you've answered the question, it'll let you see what the answers are so far. But on the whole, we're seeing people either have, it's mixed. Some are having no change in churn or a decrease, and some are seeing a slight increase in churn. I guess it's going to depend on the business. So I'm going to close this out. Then our final question, has your reactivation strategy changed since COVID? So we're looking at whether you made substantial changes to reactivation, slight changes to reactivation, or no changes to reactivation, knowing that there's an opportunity due to the temporary nature of this particular crisis to potentially get consumers to come back. Very interesting. So most of you have made changes to your reactivation campaigns. Some have made significant, some have made slight tweaks, and then a minority, about 30% of folks, haven't made any changes. So I'm going to go ahead and close this out. All right. So now I just want to remind, for the folks that are watching on replay, I just want to remind you that if you want to see the polls, the handouts link at the bottom of your player, you can actually download the results and see the results of the surveys during this live broadcast. Now we're going to go to the panel. I'm going to ask the panelists to turn their cameras on and we'll dive into the questions. Wonderful. We're all here. All right. So I'm going to actually start this portion of the call by with Lev and Liz. I want to bring you guys into the conversation. I'd like to have each of you introduce yourselves and just quickly tell us, how your business was impacted during the pandemic, so we have a little bit of context for the conversation.
Yep. Hi, I'm Liz Owens. I'm VP of Marketing for Paper Source. For those who are not familiar with this cherished brand, we are a 37-year-old lifestyle brand, really here for all your needs, not only in paper and stationery, but unique gifts and other items that allow you to give, live, create, and celebrate in unique ways. We are a retailer, so we have 135 stores, and in fact, prior to COVID, had acquired 28 Papyrus stores. And so day one of opening our first Papyrus store was also day one of shelter in place. So obviously the pandemic has given us a lot of new challenges. I think as we talk today, there will be some inspiring green shoots that we discovered through this. But obviously as a retailer with what was due to be 165 doors, shelter in place did pose some challenges to customer engagement. But we've been working with Optimove and our internal teams to really use this moment to engage with customers differently.
My name is Lev, and I'm the CEO. And I'm the CEO of US Auto Parts, and we primarily run a website called carparts.com. And I heard the question, and then I dropped off after the question came. So
just introduce yourself and tell us how your business was impacted by the pandemic, just so we have context for the rest of the conversation.
Yeah, I think through the first 2 weeks when the pandemic started and when the stay-at-home orders started coming in, the business was impacted by basically sales were going away, traffic was down, double digits year over year and week over week. And I think it was more of people kind of trying to deal with a new normal and kind of understanding, what this meant for them and how long this was going to last. Nobody really knew anything. So I think those first 2 weeks were really the toughest. And, we had a lot of plans on what we were going to do with our people. We have warehouses all over the country, how we were going to transition to work from home. And then after 2 weeks, the demand just spiked. And then when the checks started hitting, the $1,200 stimulus checks as well as additional unemployment benefits, that's when the business really started flying. So from then on, now we're in the opposite mode of trying to keep up with the demand. But those first 2 weeks were the toughest, and then after that, it completely reversed course, and just e-commerce was on fire.
That's great. I guess consumers probably not wanting to go as much to body shops or repair shops, and instead kind of deciding to take on those tasks at home, or just taking on repairs maybe that they didn't have time to do before, but now have time to work on.
Yeah, I think it's a combination of factors. I think, if you had one car at home that you were using and another car that was just sitting there, and you were maybe using public transportation, I think now people are going to be less likely to get on a bus or a train or an airplane. I think we're seeing that play out in China. Personal mobility is doing really well, but public transportation is still at kind of 50 to 60% of where it was pre-COVID. I think a lot of the DIY really thrives in a recessionary environment because people are trying to save money, and the same repair you can do at a shop for $500-$600, you can do yourself for $150-$200. And there are a ton of videos on YouTube. There are a ton of resources available that can walk you step by step of how to do a lot of these repairs. And then just people being stuck at home, we launched a campaign of kind of things you can do at home, to entertain your kids. And it was just simple things like replacing your air filter, or just really, really simple stuff that anybody can do. But you just don't think about it, and it takes you 20-30 minutes, and you get to maintain your car, and at the same time, kind of keep the kids occupied for however long it takes you to do that maintenance repair. So I think it's just a combination of different things that came together for us.
That's great. And I guess Lev, I'm going to stick with you for a second. I guess with those changes, what are some of the retention challenges that you've seen since the start of the pandemic, and how have you adjusted or adapted your retention strategies in response to those?
Yeah, so for us, it was basically survival mode because demand outpaced any kind of projections we could have made. And just to give you guys an idea, so our biggest week prior to COVID-19 was roughly $10 million in 1 week in revenue. And then post-pandemic, we were seeing, 12.5, 13 million of demand just coming through the doors. And
Wow.
our DCs were not built for that kind of volume, nor was our inventory, nor was our communication strategy. And so what we saw as kind of this progressed is that we started selling out of inventory, and then we got hit with FedEx starting to limit the amount of pickups they would do at certain locations. And so I think there was a lot of press about it around Nordstrom's and some of the other retailers. And it impacted us as well, especially in Nevada. So Nevada has a lot of e-commerce DCs that service California, which is a very populous state, and so Nevada was really impacted. So the retention strategy really became kind of a communication plan. How do we communicate to the consumer that we are not going to meet their expectation on delivery? So today we show them when they can expect their parts. Well, how do we message to them that there are delays without sounding like we're offloading the blame to FedEx or operational issues or wherever that may be? So it really turned into a communication strategy, and across multiple channels, right? It wasn't just emails going out to customers telling them, hey, your order is delayed, and here are the reasons and here are the things we're doing to kind of fix it and remedy it. But also on social and how do we deal with that? We saw a huge increase in emails and chats originating on our website, calls coming into the call center. So we just weren't prepared operationally to handle the amount of volume that was coming in. And so it really turned into more of a communication strategy to the consumer, new and old, kind of telling them, hey, here are all the issues. And the path we chose is, let's just be upfront with our customer, right? Let's just tell them, hey, this is what we're experiencing. This is what we're doing to fix it. There's no quick fix to this. But we promise to do better, and that's kind of the path we're walking on now.
Well, I mean, Amazon, that's the right way to handle it. Amazon wasn't able to live up to their one day. Still, they're not up to one day. They weren't able to even live up to 2 day. Things are coming, a week or more for Prime customers. So I think if you just take a lesson from them, if you communicate proactively and let people know when you can deliver and explain that, this is an unprecedented time where things kind of spiked in an unpredictable fashion, I think consumers understand as long as the communication is there.
Yeah, but that's a very different strategy than before, right? Before you would put a customer in a swim lane of like, hey, here are the different emails they would get depending on, what category they purchased in or what car they drive. You would put them in different automated email chain. And now we had to basically just scratch all of that and say, okay, now we just need to communicate to them and just be upfront and be honest and forget the 10% off or 5% off your next purchase. Like, we just want to make sure that you have a good experience on the purchase you just made.
Yep. Liz, I want to bring you in. And actually, before I do, I want to quickly remind the audience that you can ask questions for the panelists. You just put them in the Q&A box that's on the top, on the white panel to the right of your screen. Liz, what have you seen in terms of retention challenges, and how have you adjusted your strategies?
Yeah, so for us, well, one, I just have to say it's interesting to hear, because you wouldn't think auto parts and a specialty retailer had that much in common, but the DIY movement really did kind of kick in on both sides. So, for us, with having these stores that were just hubs for experience and service, and having those removed and having people turn inside, our biggest challenge was, how do you take these people who willingly go into the stores because it is truly, and we've seen this in surveys, their happy place, and now they're in such uncertain times in their house trying to look for ways to be happy. That became a big retention challenge for us. And then additionally, because we're so ingrained with moments and seasons, wedding is a core business for us, and so many brides and grooms and couples were having to make some really tough decisions about what they do for their big day. Even the consumer who's not involved in wedding is having to think about birthdays differently. COVID came when Easter and Mother's Day were right at the peak of when we would typically celebrate in stores. So we really had to take a step back and think about what does the consumer want? What does the consumer need? And that's where my team on the marketing side really had to be nimble. We had to listen. And so what we were able to do is really focus on some of our core values. So we've always been a company built around curation. So we don't have stores, but we have an e-commerce site filled with thousands and thousands of products, probably much like Lev. Every little item you could need for a project is available for you on the website. But when times are uncertain and people feel like they need help, getting that curated and in one place so that they can feel successful, they can feel inspired, they can feel like they can bring that happiness into their house, that became not only a merchandising action, or not only a marketing action, but a merchandising action. So our merchant teams, our e-com team, and my team really worked quickly to bundle products, to create shop the sheet type technology where if you see the picture and you love it, how do you get all those items without having to click around on the website? And so we enacted that really quickly, and then folded it into our marketing campaign to give people that same type of service, just in a different environment. So we had bundles for Easter, bundles for Mother's Day. We also thought about, what is the customer doing? We're a lifestyle brand, and COVID meant that our lives changed. And so for our customer, much like Lev, we did activities at home. So puzzles became big. Our core business that wasn't necessarily a growth business, but a solid business that kind of went back to our roots, crafting, all of a sudden blew up. So much like Lev's team, our supply chain had to make some adjustments. You know, we had to do more on the production side to satisfy this emerging need. And then the other thing that we did is really just think about who we are as a brand. And we're a community. I mean, our stores, yes, we have product, but people wanted to go there to connect. They wanted to see makers. They wanted to talk about projects. And so we kind of went back to basics and just focused on content. And so we went to Instagram, which is an amazing channel for us in the everyday. But we brought some free content to people through some programming that our head of DIY pulled together very quickly. So we had a craft recess, which happened every day. It was things that you could find around the house that you could do with kids of all ages. And we just focused on keeping that content going. We knew adults were looking for ways to connect and get inspired. So she hosted on Instagram Live a craft happy hour, which happened on Thursdays. And then the last thing we really did is, again, back to our roots, cards. With so many people home, wondering how loved ones are doing, wanting to express themselves, wanting to connect, our teams really looked at our greeting card assortment, which was the reason to go into stores, and thought about how is a customer going to access that in the time of COVID. So we brought a lot more product onto e-commerce. And if you think about it, buying a single greeting card on a website doesn't seem like the first thing you'd sign up to do. But when you're home and you're just longing for ways to connect, it actually turned out to be a really smart move by our merchant teams. The other thing we did is work with our maker community and our internal teams to produce more cards that related to sympathy, birthday, and other ways that people were looking to connect in the middle of COVID, and actually saw what has been a huge business grow exponentially just by bringing it onto e-com and celebrating this idea of connecting with people. And then the last thing we did was really focus on some innovation that related to customer needs. So we were already thinking about the fact that it was winter and the flu was around. And so the teams had already thought about hand sanitizer as just part of our core business. And when COVID hit and some of these supply chain issues happened, especially with Amazon, we actually had key items that grew in ways we did not expect. So hand sanitizer flew not only with our existing customers, but brought in a ton of new customers, which I know we'll talk about later. And then we also started to bring in masks and then offer our paid workshop programming, which happened in stores. We brought to the Zoom platform to give people another way to connect and learn and still feel inspired, even though they couldn't access their happy place, which was our stores.
Yeah, so it sounds like a lot of your strategy is centered around the merchandise, like the product mix, the merchandising, and then also trying to figure out a way to create those communities virtually, since people couldn't use the stores as that hub.
Yeah.
What are you seeing among some of the other Optimove customers? Like, what retention strategies are they implementing right now?
Yeah, so first of all, in terms of channels, so most of our clients have tighten their marketing budgets, mostly by reducing their social media ad spend, and also double down on content creation, as Liz mentioned, with their social accounts like blogs and videos, but also on email, traditional email. So even with all the clutter in customers' inboxes, email is still perceived as a more personal form of communication, and it's an easier way to communicate emotionally intelligent messaging. And we see that retail email open rates have actually increased by about 40% then compared to normal times. So likely because customers at home, they're more receptive to personalized offers. Now, one more thing that we've seen that has been working very well with our clients is we have a metric that we encourage customers to use called churn factor. Now, churn factor is an individualized metric that we calculate for every single customer, and it's essentially to calculate the number of times the customer missed, number of cycles they missed based on their personal frequency. So for example, if I purchase in a cadence of once a month and I haven't made a purchase in 2 months, my churn factor is 2. Now during normal times, we would say, okay, if you miss 2 cycles, then that is a customer at risk of churn. But now during COVID, we understand customers might have changed their behavior, their consumption. So we would encourage our customers to lift that rate to higher levels, since it really correlates with churn rates, but basically making sure that they're contacted in a timely manner, because not all customers are created equal. And the last thing that I'm going to mention is use of customer level web tracking. So to identify individual customers landing on the website. Now it's very different if a net new lead lands on the website compared to a retail only shopper, for example, that suddenly comes. It shows it's a much stronger kind of opportunity if an existing customer that hasn't been on the website yet lands on the website. So there are different technological solutions for that, and we really encourage our customers to take advantage of it.
Got it. And Yoni, just a follow-up question. You mentioned email open rates, so that kind of triggered a thought. Obviously people are at home. Are you seeing any differences other than the open rates are higher? Are there different send times that are working better? I've heard something like people are using their desktops more than their phones these days because they're all working from home, so or laptops are at home and they're using them to open emails. What are some of the factors driving that higher open rate?
So I don't have any specific metrics that come up in terms of the different platforms that customers use, but we do encourage our customers to do a lot of different both send time checks and also use a lot of A/B testing to see what triggers open. So for example, use of sanitizer in the subject line, you can see open rates spike. It's just the use of words. On the contrary, don't use something like COVID or something that scares. Now, initially in the beginning of the pandemic, there were a lot of emails coming from basically CEOs of every single company you've ever heard of, and you forgot that you were subscribed to their list, and then that caused actually a decrease and spikes in unsubscribes and spam traps, and so we did encourage our customers to kind of refine their list and making sure that the messaging is really intact and again, emotionally intelligent and considerate of the situation.
Got it. Thanks, Yoni. Now, Liz, I guess with stores, you're seeing a lot of new customers that were previously customers that shopped in the physical retail stores that are now ordering greeting cards or projects through the e-commerce site. What are you seeing with those customers? Are they behaving differently or behaving kind of virtually differently than your traditional customers? Are they buying different products? How are you onboarding them?
Yeah, so we actually weren't sure we could get store customers to buy online. So luckily we had just brought Optimove on and fully had them in place in February. So really Yoni's team helped us unpack a lot of this. So we did see really positive migration of typically offline customers moving online. I want to say we had about a 2-time lift. Okay. And the number of people who are willing to do that. So I do think that was eye-opening. I do applaud our merchant teams for some of the decisions they made to make it convenient for the customer who's used to going into the store, used to that high touch service and giving them confidence in buying online. Yes, they bought different things. I think what we found in the data is they bought things that were pertinent to the time. So if we had someone who was going to the store and buying gift, they came online in this moment and bought puzzles and hand sanitizers and a mask. So their loyalty was there. We did see the customers who came on did spend more, which I think even if you think about your own behavior, if you go into a store that has cards and then you're going onto their e-commerce site, it's very natural to buy more than just a greeting card. But I do think some of the bundling tactics, I do think some of the key items help contribute to the order values that we saw from those customers who came online. And then the other thing that kind of worked in terms of new customer, in terms of existing customers coming onto e-commerce is every March is National Craft Month. So every March we have a promotion around paper, craft tools, all the things that you as a maker or even just a novice creator would need. And so it was already built into our promotional strategy. And so like Yoni was saying earlier, we actually did see the benefit of that promo early for us in March because it was right at the moment everyone was coming indoors, trying to figure out what the new normal was going to look like and seeing that there was a lot they could do in the DIY space. And this sale offered them the chance to try something new. If they didn't have a heat embosser, what better time than now to try and get it? If they wanted some beautiful paper to do some paper arts, you could get an incredible discount. So we were happy with the migration, but again, you know, when you have a fleet of 165 doors, that top line engagement is really hard to replicate. Even when you're posting, you know, double-digit e-com growth, you know, there's still more we can do, but we were happy with the migration. And now that stores are coming back online, I do think there's some tactics we're working through on the churn side to try and see what will engagement look like in this new normal.
Got it. And actually, Lev, I want to talk about churn for a second, and then Lev, I'm going to come back to you because, you know, what have you seen in terms of churn since you kind of mentioned it? Have you seen churn rates increase since the pandemic? And do you know why your customers are churning? Liz, I want to ask you.
Oh, me.
That's for Liz.
Yeah.
I'm going to come back to Lev on
Yeah, I do. We're not totally sure churn other than, you know, we're a neighborhood store. Our head of operations in the last few years has really also been getting us into office pop locations. So I think convenience and proximity became a factor in some of this churn. I mean, for me, I live in Chicago, but I work in the Loop. And so my ability to just grab and go it isn't there. And so I have to be more intentional about my purchase. I think for other consumers in my market, they live in the suburbs. So coming into the city is just not happening for them. And so I do think that is a factor in churn and retention. I also do think that needs change. So, you know, we help people figure out how to give, live, create, and celebrate. And really during COVID, the ways that people came together, the ways that people celebrated changed. And so I think it's just been a shift in us as a society really figuring out what does the new birthday party look like? What does graduation look like? What is a wedding? So I think we've done some good innovation and we've been really nimble and agile in listening to the customer. I think we've put some good things out that give me some hope that we're adapting in the right way. But I don't know if we've had enough time to really see what exactly is driving that re-engagement now that we've pivoted.
Got it. Well, I promised I'd go to Lev, but I'm going to quickly switch because there's some audience questions and we want to make sure they get answered. And Chris Patterson had a question specifically for Optimove, but he said in the live poll questions, we saw a split in what new customers look like during COVID. Are there different? Are they different for different product categories? So I guess, Yoni, do you have a view across your customers? Are you seeing that new customers across different categories are behaving differently?
Yeah, so first of all, as I showed in the product preferences slides, that we see a shift in terms of in different customers, different verticals. When I say customers, I mean brands, our customers. In different verticals, you'll see different shifts in different different product categories. And again, when a brand introduces a new product line that never existed before, like let's say hand sanitizer or face mask for, let's say, a fashion company, then that changes the mix. And as we so first of all, it's hard to say what these customers' product preferences are. And it will be interesting to see again in a couple of months, because I mean, if a customer made their first purchase or during the pandemic and then very shortly after made another purchase, it might be from a convenience standpoint. So we need to wait a few months for a first cycle to complete and then assess how many customers have churned, should we divide based on their first order characteristics in terms of the number of categories, the number of items, the average order value. There's a lot of things to analyze, and then we can see over time how we can reactivate those customers and prevent them from becoming one-timers.
Got it. And then I guess, Lev, now I want to turn to you, because you kind of mentioned when we had the prep for this that the customer mix shifted a little bit at US Auto Parts since the pandemic. A lot more kind of to do-it-yourselfers versus, some of the more business-oriented customers. How has that played out for your business?
Yeah, so we primarily service a DIY segment, and so I think if you kind of look at what has happened since the pandemic, and coming out of this, we're going to be in a recession, and the recessionary environments usually lead to people kind of spending more time at home, looking to save money. So I think from our perspective, the total addressable market for us used to be, online penetration for auto parts is about 3%. It's a $500 billion industry, so it's 15 billion. And what we've seen since then is that a lot of the dollars have migrated from offline to online. Even if the online penetration doubles from 3 to 6%. We're talking about an extra 15 billion in total addressable market, and there's just not a lot of competition in this segment. So the pie has grown so much that we're barely keeping up with the demand, and I think it'll keep happening. And we're seeing it in other categories, right? I mean, you look at other categories that are kind of hard to fulfill, like furniture. Online penetration in furniture was like 14%. My guess is post-pandemic is going to go way up. You look at, gardening and things like that, where people are kind of just trying to stay busy. But there are also categories where, the product is not uniform. If in gardening or in home improvement, you're buying, beams, and you're buying dirt, and you're buying all kinds of differently oddly shaped items. Same with furniture. I think we're going to continue that trend, kind of continue. Until we get to a more reasonable online penetration. You look at apparel, online penetration in apparel is 30%. And you look at other countries like China, the online penetration in China across other categories is closer to 40%. So I think we as the United States have a long way to go. We've historically been under-penetrated in online sales, not just in my category, but I think across all businesses. And I think this pandemic has accelerated that penetration probably by 3 to 5 years.
Yeah, for sure. And actually, Danny Salinas had a question for you, Lev, specifically. He's asking when the auto industry, when you expect it to fully recover. But in many ways, for the do-it-yourselfers, it seems like it's more than recovered and grown. So maybe, I guess, the just to rephrase the question a little bit, is, what do you see as the future of the auto industry? Do you think it's going to continue to stay in the do-it-yourself scenario, or do you think it's going to move back to kind of the shops and things like that?
Yeah, the way that I think about it, and again, that's just my personal opinion, is For some repairs that are planned, I think the customer is finding the convenience of online, and they're finding the pricing online to be very attractive. For other repairs where it cannot wait, and you can't wait even one day, right? Like my car doesn't start, I gotta get on the road to get to my job. Like for those repairs, you're going to continue going to the shop or to the store, to your local AutoZone or Advance. But I think for more planned repairs, and the more comfortable the customer gets with repairing their own vehicle, we'll see that migrate to online.
Interesting. So you think that's a new behavior that's going to stick, like at-home haircuts, like start
Yes.
doing at-home car repair once they get used to doing it.
I think so.
Awesome. I'm going to ask Sue Lee has a question. I'm going to direct it to Liz. And that's going to be the last question. And Sue Lee asks you, can you elaborate on the tactics you use for migrating previous in-store only customers to shop online? So Liz, since you're the one with stores.
Yeah. Again, customer need was the primary tactic. So what we did was we did some testing with the Optimove team on some offer-based tests, whether that was free shipping or product level. But really where we saw the biggest wins were when the product fit the need. So we know our customer, we know them well. Being able at Easter time to show them a bundle of here's the basket you need to make Easter special at home, that moved the needle. Being able to bundle cards for Mother's Day because mom doesn't need just one card this year. She needs multiple cards because she's not going to be able to see her kids. We're all home. Just creating some new bundles that weren't typically part of e-com tended to be the thing that drew new store customers to the website to purchase. And then really, Yoni's brought up a couple times, hand sanitizers. I mean, we had it. We had a more luxe version of it. We never intended to have it for this moment, but we had PR who put us on several lists of places you could still get hand sanitizers. We had the factor of Amazon being behind. We had the factor of the supply chain being depleted. And we just had a migration of not only existing customers, but a healthy amount of new customers finding the brand because of these key items. And so that really just sticking to our core values and our core product and just creating it in an easy, customer-centric way, I think is what moved the needle in bringing those customers to .com. I think it also helps that we are a place of inspiration and happiness. And in COVID, I think we were all longing for that. And so just being able to be smart about the product that we did bring in, what inspiration and solution it could provide, I think that helped. And then our next wave, kind of going back to what Lev was talking about, our stores are opening, but they're opening in very different ways. I mean, we open with curbside. We have delivery through Postmates. And then, one of the things that our stores were great at, especially in the summertime, was something called Kids Camp, where our enthusiastic customers could take their kids, leave them for 2 hours for a whole week, and they could craft alongside our instructors and come away feeling successful and inspired. That's not going to happen this summer. So what we've done as a team is turn that into a subscription box model so that our customer who's still looking for that solution for their kid, the customer, to Lev's point, who's home, trying to conserve, trying to do their part to stay safe, but really needs a solution. I mean, I have a 3-year-old and I'm in the only room that has doors. Being able to craft with him and do something with him in this moment is really important. So we took that great experience that happened in stores and tried to make it digital first. So you're going to get a sub box to your door, and there's going to be a lot of resources that are free that help you as the parent walk your kid through these crafts. It allows you to do something as a family. So those are all retention tactics that we've tried to take. And really, there's been a lot of effort, but I do think a lot of the things that have worked are just being true to the customer, not thinking about our agenda, not thinking about what we were trying to comp from last year and replicating it. It's really just like, what's the customer need and how can we satisfy it in simple ways? And I think that's been where we've won in this time of COVID.
That's awesome, Liz. Thank you so much. And it sounds like you've had a lot of creative strategies to be able to move customers from the kind of store model to the online model. I'm just going to close with a couple of slides and reminders, and then we'll wrap up. So just reminding everybody, next week's webinar is how to personalize campaigns to resonate with today's customers. So you're going to want to tune in 2 p.m. next Wednesday to hear about that. Then the virtual summit is on July 28th and 29th. Make sure to sign up. We'll have amazing speakers over 2 afternoons during what were our original conference dates and are now our virtual summit dates. And then finally, if you're looking for resources, information, data about what's happening with the industry during the pandemic, our COVID-19 Resource Center is available for you. And that's the hub for all of our research, as well as some great resources from some of the partner companies we work with. I want to thank you all for joining today. It's been a pleasure having you. Thank you for participating in this discussion. And I hope you have a wonderful day. Take care. Bye, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.